And this is an interview with Melissa Esparza-Mathis. And we're happy to have you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you.
As I explained, we'll start out with up to 5-minute opening, and then we'll go around the room and questions. With me tonight, Larry Rogers. With me tonight is Dale Fessenden, James Byers, Bob Bagley, and David Smith. So go ahead and start.
I want to thank you for having me tonight, and I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Melissa Esparza-Mathis. I'm 47 years old. I am retired Army, combat veteran, served 3 tours, 2 in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. I was a linguist for embedded soldiers while I was there. I have 2 boys. My oldest son just got back from the military, so when he was infantry, go infantry. We've been married, my husband and I have been married for 25 years, so, and he's been through it with me around the world, so I couldn't have asked for a better partner. He has supported everything. Again, I want to thank you, and I want to let you know my reasons for running. I'm running because what we're looking at right now in Washington is an established partisanship issue that right now is being played on the backs of the American taxpayer and the American citizen. And when that's happening, nothing productive is being legislated, no bills are being passed. There's no productive conversation, there's no reaching across the aisles. In order to effectively have change, we have to initiate and change the voice. This is the same voices that we're looking at, they're established. We cannot have that continuously and expect there to be anything but the same ineffectiveness. So in order to actually garner the conversation, to move it forward, and to produce adequate, professional, productive, and equal change, we need to change the voices. That's why I'm running, and I hope you'll vote for me.
Okay. James, would you like to start?
Sure. We hear a lot of conversations about deficit spending. Is that something you consider essential? Or if not, how would you get rid of deficit spending in the current budget or future budgets?
Deficit spending, okay.
Our last,
Not too familiar with that concept?
sure.
entirely?
Well, the budget was just passed, the discretionary budget. The total spending is going to be like 4.7 trillion this year. That's everything.
Yes.
That includes non-discretionary, like building ships, Social Security, things that are already committed. The discretionary, of course, is going to be things like Department of Commerce, Department of Education, HUD, federal salaries. Those are all discretionary. And that includes military salaries as well.
Yes, it does.
So right now, the budget that they just passed with their continuing resolution was a total of 1.4 trillion. Of that, $1.2 trillion is deficit spending. So, what are we going to do? Do you want a balanced budget or not?
We need a balanced budget. We haven't operated with a balanced budget since the 90s.
That's true.
And in order to actually have a government that's effective and working, we can't continue to operate with a deficit that no house is going to run forever in a deficit. Eventually, it's going to shut down. It's going to close. Where are you going to get the money?
Now, there's 2 ways to deal with that. One is to stop spending it a lot. And we were talking about, 1.2 trillion out of the discretionary 1.4. That's practically everything. Or we raise revenue somehow. Now, I know President Trump has talked about it in terms of with a better economy, without raising taxes, we get more revenue. Of course, the more China fights it, that's billions of dollars in tariffs we're going to get, So Question is, what technique or tactic would you take to bring about a balanced budget?
To bring about, let's look at the areas that the deficit is covered. Let's look at that. What can we cut?
Sure.
What's essential? The idea is to formulate a government that's effective, not interventionist, and not involved in everything that we're doing. Why do we have such an overgrown government that's continuously infected in everybody's life and it's costing money? For everything that they do, it's costing somebody. We're having to pay money for it.
Sure.
So at some point, in order to narrow it down, to trim a little of that off, we need to start looking at these programs that are being instituted. They're not effective. Do we need them? At what point are we going to govern? And at one point, are we just going to become socialists? We're not socialists.
So would you want a balanced budget immediately or phased in or what?
Well, it's not going to happen immediately because we have to be able to look at everything, but it's going to have to be phased in. And we should be operating that way. I just don't understand how we're not operating what's been going on.
Sure. Thank you, Bob.
In your answers here, your questions, at what point should the right to life or personhood be granted to human beings at conception, birth, 5 days old, etc.? What action, if any, would you take to reflect this in law? I like your answer that life begins at conception and that you'd oppose any legislation that seeks to define it otherwise. Your second part of that was, I would join the fight to have the Supreme Court overturn Roe v. Wade. Roe v. Wade was done, again, by the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court can't write law.
Yeah.
So it's not a law, that it was their interpretation,
They should.
but Congress has that responsibility to override the Supreme Court. So to do away with it, are you willing to go to the platform and call the Supreme Court out, stating you've overreached your boundaries according to the Constitution, and it has no validity?
Absolutely, I am. Because all laws go through Congress before anything. That's one of the jobs of Congress, is to do that. The Supreme Court, like any other court at some point, has become so political, polarizing, and they're too influential in identity politics. And that's what's happened with that. So I have no problem when it comes to standing my ground and addressing that openly at any point.
I'm sure there's going to be other things that the Supreme Court is going to try to put through that it's Congress's responsibility to hold them accountable.
Absolutely.
And we haven't had anybody to do that. And that's what I'm looking for in a leader.
A leader cannot be afraid to stand up, be it alone. Oftentimes, a good leader will stand alone. Because when it comes to being a good leader, those decisions are contrary to popularity. So when that happens, a person cannot be afraid to stand alone. Liked, disliked, hated, what have you. But they have to be willing, and they have to have a backbone to do it.
Thank you.
So most of the time, House races are local. You know, Kevin Brady's been around a long time, has deep roots in the community, a lot of contacts. So if it's not a national election, it's a typical local election, local issue. So how do you beat Kevin in dealing with the local issue?
The local issue, how do I beat Kevin? Well, number one, like you've said, he's been around a long time. He's established in both good and bad. But mostly, what you do is you bring to the attention the voice of those people that are around in District 8. You have to bring it to their table. You have a voice. You have a representative. Do you want to be an echo? Do you want to be heard? You have to bring their voice, their vote, very personal to them. Are your needs being addressed? How often have you seen your representative? How often is he coming here? Have you received an email? Have you had a town hall meeting? Is he carrying the concerns of you and his constituents to Washington, to the legislative floor? And right now, the answer is no. He's not. As of right now, from the time he was put into office until now, he has the lowest rate when it comes to votes. The lowest rate. So obviously, you got to bring that to the table. You got to bring it home. All elections are local. All elections are local. This is affecting you because you are not being heard. You are not being representative. You are not, District 8 is not showing up. Your taxpayers are going to, you're paying for it, but you're not being represented. Do you want to continue to pay for someone when they're doing 20% or 30% of the job that you hired them to do 100% of? Would you let somebody else do that if you had a business? No, they would run you out. You would have no business.
Okay. One of your answers said, with respect to parental rights versus government rights and interests, governmental rights should never override parental rights. And in the next sentence, or the couple sentences down, you said vaccinations should definitely be mandatory.
Okay. Oh, sorry.
Oh, not mandatory?
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry,
Because I'm trying to resolve,
No,
they went that way.
I don't believe in that. The reason being is because right now, when you look at vaccinations, the FDA is only going to tell you what they need to tell you.
Okay.
What they're obligated, disclaimer-wise, to tell you. We're not getting all the information. And number two, those are your children. They don't belong to the FDA. They don't belong to the federal government. At the end of the day, you're going to answer for those children. No one else is going to answer for them.
Okay. The fact remains that you can't get into a public school without vaccinations. How do you address that?
Well, can I take this personally? On a personal level? Okay.
If you like.
I am. This is how I did with my children, okay? And I'm not, everybody has that right. How they're gonna do it. My children are allergic to everything. Up until they outgrew it. 15, 16 years old. They had to have medication to be outside. Now mind you, they're going all over the world. So we had to succumb to the understanding that if they were going to get vaccinated, they had to be separate vaccines. They could not be mixed together. The second you mix those vaccines together, that's when everything starts, you're jamming all of that vaccine in. Everything has to be separated. You have a better chance of a healthier child.
So they received their vaccinations just in a different fashion.
Exactly. And they were not mixed. They
Okay.
were not mixed. And then we just homeschooled.
Okay. Larry?
Okay, so do you work now? What do you do now?
I'm retired, but I do volunteer with the church. Quite a bit. Just came from that earlier today. We're addressing an issue with CPS and some children. There were
And you were in the Army for how many years?
15, 16 years.
15?
Yeah.
And what area do you live in?
I live, actually, we live in Trinity, which is it's about 50 miles north of here. It's a small little subdivision called Glendale. Population, I think, is my whole entire family. Yeah, we actually have a sign that says Glendale, and population is my family. We're pretty proud of that.
Who's your mayor?
My mayor is, I think it's Huffman.
Not related to the mayor?
No, because it's Trinity. We still have our own.
Oh.
James?
We still have to be there.
Now, this may be, if this is too much of the weeds, I'll move to a different question, but under the 10th Amendment issue you're talking about, that yes, state rights should be respected and that sort of thing. What a lot of people seem to skip over is the 14th Amendment. And the 14th Amendment is what opened up the doorway to imposing the Bill of Rights on the states, because before that, the states didn't have to respect any of that. So only the federal government. So now we have the Constitution restricting both federal and state governments. Well, where are the state rights in that? What's left?
Well, when you look at the state rights, if they're here's the divine issue. with
Quick
it.
example, Second Amendment, right to bear arms.
Yes.
The states can't infringe on that because of the 14th Amendment. Should the states be allowed to take away our guns in
Absolutely
violation
not.
of?
No.
Okay.
No, never. That's, no, they should not.
What about,
I don't care what they're passing.
what about commerce? All right, because now the 14th Amendment was used to basically require restaurants to serve people regardless of race. Well, is that okay?
Well, at that point, you're looking at the federal government being the social party that they are, infringing because of the discrimination aspect. of it.
Yes,
That they-
correct.
So that's why they put in that way.
So that's
there's-
acceptable, right?
As
I'm not
Americans,
disagreeing, yeah.
as Americans, looking at our Constitution, everybody's equal.
That's right, because of the 14th Amendment, which did basically eliminate a lot of individual state rights, not all, only really dealing with the Bill of Rights. And of course, we have the Supreme Court that seems to find a whole new, swath of rights, and yeah, that's an issue. And right now, the process of reining them in is pretty extensive. You're talking about a constitutional amendment, that type of thing. So I guess my question is, for you, do you have a particular area where you feel like the federal government has infringed on state authority that it should not be doing?
Education.
Okay,
I mean, the federal government should not be that what they're doing is they're using their tax dollars
Yes,
to
correct.
dictate your curriculum. That is unacceptable.
so you would give the tax dollars without strings attached?
Well, should it fall on the state to do that?
Of course,
Thank
I
you.
agree.
Exactly.
Okay,
Why are we involved in that? When we start involving the federal government, then we start involving, guess what? The higher the dollar. Because everybody's assuming that, the federal government's gonna cover that. So we can raise everything. Private, public, everything. Even your universities. They know that once you apply for a Pell Grant or a student loan, guess what? If they did not have that comfort in knowing that they were gonna get that, would the tuition rates be as high as they are? Probably not.
is that something you would phase in or just cut right away? Student loans, that kind of thing?
Student loans.
Well, being insured by the federal government.
Gotta phase that in because it's gonna affect an overwhelmingly large number of people.
Professors,
Them too. Well, yes, budgets are gonna get cut.
that's right. All right,
But
thank
if there was no guarantee of these universities getting that money, these tuition rates would not be skyrocketed and these kids would not be bankrupt.
you. That's right.
On the questionnaire, great question, and there's a number of us that are vets in here, so if we were attacked again in a manner similar to 9/11, what should be our response and what, if anything, should we do differently than we did before? So we were recently attacked in Iran. While we wrote these questions out months ago, they're coming to fruition right now. It wasn't the same as 9/11, but it was still an attack at the embassy. Do you feel the president's going about this the right way? And what would you do differently as a congressional leader?
I believe, because I'm not privy to the intel that he has shared with our congressional leaders and our senators, that he was decisive, he was quick, and accurate.
Yeah.
Yes. Out of many presidents, he stood his ground, he was decisive, he was accurate. There's nothing I would have done different, besides supporting him even louder.
Thank you.
Would you show the restraint he showed
Absolutely.
today after the attack of the Iranian missiles on our two bases this week?
Would I
Was
show
it 8
restraint?
Was the 15 missiles?
It was-
Nobody was hurt.
In other words,
And-
what should you do now?
Yeah,
Given what would I do now? Would I show that restraint? Yes, you'd have to show that restraint, because what you're carrying, what you're looking at right now is, we have soldiers over there,
yeah,
we have them over here. We are deploying them as we speak.
sure.
So when we go to put these young men and women back in there, we have to be very, very careful of what we're asking this generation to do. So we have to show restraint.
Okay.
That should be, when we go in to put our young men and women, war should always be the last option, but it should be an option. But we need to be very careful how we spend our American blood.
Yeah.
And I always tell people I speak multiple languages too. I speak English, Canadian, Australian, New Zealander, British.
Dad says he speaks Canadian.
So, how did you develop an interest in linguistics? And can you talk a little more about your background in that? It's an interesting career.
Well, my first language was Spanish. Of course, I was born in Conroe, but I was raised by my grandparents early on. And Spanish was the language. So I had to learn English. English was difficult. Okay?
It had changed.
So when learning English, my mother, of course, was in the Air Force. We went to Europe. In Europe, I was in England for 5 years. They speak multiple languages. My mother speaks multiple languages. And when you're going to communicate with anybody, one way to bridge that is through communication. If you're trying to get anywhere with anybody, it's imperative that you learn how to communicate. That's number one. So it's always been a passion. Then when my mother would often speak to my father, and she didn't want us to know what was going on, she'd speak in Russian. I don't speak that language. I chose Arabic. So I had to figure out, I look at her and I think to myself, wow, okay, I love that. I love that capability. So that might be something that I need to look at to further who I am as an individual. It's personal growth before professional. It's a personal growth. And I also instituted that with my children. They speak Arabic better than I do. They learned it earlier than I did. They speak Farsi. They're
So what language do you speak when you don't want your children to know what you're talking to your husband about?
Spanish.
Really?
Yes, because I speak Spanish, but they're like, well, that's the one language that you didn't teach us. That was probably because it was easier for me. I didn't think you needed to know it, so I figured maybe you'd go to school for it.
So you knew the language before you went to the military?
Absolutely.
You did, okay.
It was personal growth. I taught myself, number one, how to speak it, number two, how to read it, and then how to write it. The writing was the easiest part out of all of it.
Wow.
And then I went in and tested.
Okay, on the topic of mass shootings, you said government should enforce the laws, no reason to further infringe on the rights of American citizens, basically status quo. One of the things that has been controversial on the mass shootings is gun-free zones. So would you give us your thoughts on gun-free zones?
Gun-free zones, to me, are an open invitation for someone to go in who's intent on doing harm. They're gonna go to a gun-free zone to do it.
So we should eliminate those for schools,
Absolutely,
hospitals?
absolutely. Gun-free zones are dangerous. They're dangerous. Every gun-free zone that they've established has had a shooting. We have enough laws on the books that are already governing the law-abiding legal citizens of America. Why do we need to put any more? And when it comes to a gun-free zone, you're asking for danger. You're asking for danger.
Larry?
One of the questions on the questionnaire was, please explain why you do or do not support the government providing financial benefits and free services to non-citizens. Could you explain your answer on that, please?
Absolutely. Remember it. The reason I don't agree with it, number one, those are benefits that have been afforded and already projected for the American people with our tax dollars. Tax dollars. Number two, if we open that up, that doesn't stop the floodgates at the border. That just continues to make it higher. We cannot continue to do that when the very few Americans that are receiving it are the ones that deserve it, because it's being dished out to immigrants. It's not that was never the setup.
Okay.
Promoting that only allows for more.
Okay.
Now, I see what you were saying in your answer to the questionnaire, that vaccinations should be mandatory for all. Now, I know when my children were born, 'cause I did research on the different vaccinations, and the truth is, and the AMA has now admitted, as they admitted like 4 or 5 years ago, that vaccines for an infant that's 6 months or less are useless, that the child doesn't need it. Sure, if it's a child, sickle cell anemia issues, that's not a vaccination. We're just talking about vaccinations in general, that they're pointless, and when asked, well, why do you still recommend they be required, their answer was, well, we're trying to train the parents to bring their children in, for treatment. So for my kids, I refused. Of course, I had different doctors come in and nurses and that sort of thing. So my question is it really right that we trust the medical community to force us to really have any kind of treatment, barring a current outbreak of a disease?
In that regard, I mean, yes, the doctors are saying this, but they're being pushed to say it by lobbyists that are pursuing that vaccine or that
That's
portion of it.
a lot of truth to that, sure.
Okay, so when it comes to should we do that?
Require vaccinations.
Let me tread carefully on that one, because the
Sure.
way I believe is they're gonna have to come up with a lot cleaner a vaccine with less damage. Unless it's essential, then what are you injecting my child with?
Mm-hmm.
What type of poison am I gonna be subjected to, or my child, that you've put together and that you've lobbied and gotten permission to pass through? And
Well, so you're saying we should be able to refuse vaccinations?
Absolutely.
Oh, okay, I may have misread your answer then. So, were your children vaccinated?
Not at first. No, only when it was mandatory through the military to move them from the United States of America to
Overseas?
Germany.
I got
Then
you.
it became out of my hands, okay?
Okay.
I wanted my family, so I had to capitulate on that, okay? I did.
Okay. Thank you.
I know you answered it in here, but would you do this on the camera? Please explain why or why not you will vote no on amnesty in every form, on every vote.
When it comes to amnesty, why should we pardon, what have you, however you want to put it, them from breaking the original law of being here illegally? If you begin to pardon that behavior, then you're starting to set a precedent for everybody else that's trying to come here and come in illegally. You're opening that window of opportunity for more people to continue to do that. And not only that, but why would we pardon someone that we haven't vetted? We have no idea of the potential harm or the potential good. We have no real vetting of who they are. But no, we should not give them that because you're opening the door to so much more.
So you want to deport the ones that are not legal? It's a large number, like what, 14 million?
Yes.
That's a lot of buses.
I would not,
Man.
I'm not gonna vote yes for amnesty. So what the law is.
Would it be they could stay, just not get citizenship?
They need to get citizenship. That's
In
the only
order
way
to
they
stay.
should be here. What's the
Okay.
problem? Why wouldn't you want to be a citizen of the United States? Why wouldn't
Well,
you?
but you're
Yeah.
saying you would vote they couldn't, because they
Yes,
wouldn't get
no,
amnesty.
I would not.
So
I'm
the
not
ones
gonna open
that,
the door.
that can't get amnesty and are illegal,
They need to go.
they need to go. Okay,
There's a reason why they can't get amnesty, and there's a reason why they're illegal.
that's
And
true.
they're not gonna hide here.
That's true. Thank you.
And suck up the tax dollars for everything, all the freebies
Exactly.
that they get.
That they have put nothing in.
Right.
Their money is not being spent here, it's being sent somewhere else.
In a lot of cases.
You and Kevin seem to have a common viewpoint on the USMCA, on free trade. Can you expound on that?
Where trade is good, we need it. It's gonna promote more jobs. The only thing that I don't agree with was what we capitulated on with the prescription, the drugs. That's the only problem I have with that.
What was that?
Was what Nancy Pelosi had supposedly withheld for a year to negotiate, was where Mexico and Canada we would have a set rate for 10 years. But now we don't even have that. We have nothing. There's no protection. So our prices will not go down. We have no comfort in that. But theirs will, because we're gonna pay for it.
Okay, under federal tax law, everybody who claims to be conservative will say they want smaller government, lower spending, and therefore less taxes. But one of the comments you made in here was spending should not fall on the shoulders of the working class. Everybody needs to pay their fair share. So who is there about the working class? Who would then pay the taxes that are needed for the smaller government and so forth?
Well, everybody should pay their fair share. We're talking about the working class, when I'm talking about the middle class, maybe I worded that wrong. It shouldn't fall completely on that burden. Everybody, corporations, millionaires, come on,
Where do corporations get their money?
the people.
Okay, so the people pay the tax with this hand or they pay it with this hand?
But at some point, we all have a burden. And it shouldn't just fall on, the heavy burden should not fall on the ones that are working one job, 12 hours a day, 2 jobs, 18 hours a day. That's double time, no. No.
Okay, well, then how do you define fair share?
Flat tax,
Okay, flat tax 10% on all wages.
all wages. And 10%, the reason I say 10%, because I believe that's what, Jesus, like, 10%. You start there.
Okay, okay. Larry?
On climate change, we got a question on climate change. Do you believe in humans are the major contributor to climate change, and if so, what action should the federal government take? Could you explain that?
No, I don't believe that humans are.
Say again?
You believe that humans are the major contributor? Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
No. I think it's, if you're gonna look at that, we have to look at everything. We have to look at everything. Is it just what we're doing? No. What part should the federal government play? I can't even say this now. We need to start taking a look at the corporations. And let's look at China. Let's go there. If we're gonna do anything, they're putting more into the air. If we're going to do it here, let's go over there. It's a global issue. That's not just America's issue. That can't be just America's concern.
James?
You said at 10% tax rate, I guess we said that. And the GDP for 2019 was $5,385,635,000,000. 10% of that would be $538,563,000,000. Now, the current federal budget is $4.7 trillion, so that would cut it down to $500 billion. I don't think we could even build ships with that amount of money.
Good point.
So, with the flat tax, I guess, I don't know, what would you add on tariffs, or what else did you do to raise the funds that we need? Huh?
You know, tax Bitcoin.
Yeah, tax Bitcoin.
Yeah,
I don't
big
think so.
time. They've made some money. They've made some money. That's a
So
good question.
what would you do to raise the tax revenue we would need if we just have a 10% flat tax?
I have to look at that, the fair tax,
Okay,
yeah,
all right, food for thought.
definitely.
We have 25 congressmen, Republican congressmen in the state of Texas. Who do you feel that you would align yourself with as a congressman to look to as a mentor, to be able to help you on your first term or your first year? Crenshaw? Okay.
I just think he needs to be a little bit more clear on the red flag issue.
Well, and I'm not sure what his voting record is at this point.
I think what got him in a little bit of chaotic trouble was he didn't make himself clear on the red flag issue.
There's a lot of things he didn't do well on. So while we're talking about things that didn't do well, what do you know about UN Agenda 21?
No, I'm gonna be honest,
That might be something to research.
definitely.
You know, over my lifetime, 40 years, inflation's been about 250%, 240%. but education has went up 1,250%. So, can you talk a little bit about your views and how do we get control of these exploding tuition and other fees that universities charge, and the role the federal government should play in that?
The role the federal government should play in that?
Yeah.
Quit handing out grants and quit backing and securing those loans. Because when you go to secure them, they know they're gonna get it. So when they're guaranteed to get that money, they don't care what you're saddled with. Because they're getting theirs first. So when they're getting that, they're gonna keep rising. The more children, the more kids they get in there, the more money they're getting from the federal government.
Okay. Nullification, 10th Amendment. I think we all have a general understanding that if it's not in the Constitution, the federal government shouldn't be doing it. But the Sixth Amendment has what I guess is commonly referred to as a Supremacy Clause. It says, this Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties and so forth. So Article 6 includes the laws along with the Constitution as the supreme law of the land. So how do you determine what laws are subject to 10th Amendment or nullification procedures, whatever? How do you make that distinction? The Constitution is pretty clear, but then you have this huge body of law.
When the states are making a law, which, I mean, the states have a right to make their laws.
Right.
But if they're receiving some kind of tax money that's going to go against a law that they're going to create, why should they? Let's take California. They're sanctuary cities. That's, to me, they're harboring illegals. They're harboring criminals.
Okay, but you're off on track of laws that states make. I'm talking about the Constitution, 1787 Constitution, which says that the Constitution and the laws of the United States are the authority and the supreme law of the land. I'm talking about laws that the federal government makes in addition to the Constitution, because the Sixth Amendment says the laws of the land and the Constitution.
So where would I fall on that one?
Yeah, what would you do about, well, for instance, that would not be good, but some of the laws that that Congress makes and states would like to nullify, which ones would be subject to nullification?
The ones that do not, let's take the ones that interfere with that. Those that do not interfere with a person's form of that don't discriminate against a person, race, creed, or religion. Because you are free if you're an American born here. That's Constitution. So
Okay.
the state should not make anything that's going to interfere with that. That's what I think.
Okay, but if the federal government, if the U.S. Congress passed a law, for instance, that said every U.S. citizen must be vaccinated,
Yeah.
is that subject to nullification? And if so, on what basis? Because the Sixth
Yes,
Amendment of the
it is subject
Constitution
to
says the
nullification.
Constitution and the laws of the United States are supreme. over the states.
Because it's interfering, yes, it should be nullified. Because it's interfering with the state's right to govern. The state has a responsibility, they have their governor, he has a right to govern his state. So yes, you can't pass that law, I don't think the state should, or the government should be allowed to pass that law when the governor still has his right as a governorship, or we wouldn't have them.
Could you not use that same argument for every law Congress passes? Can you think of an exception of a law where Congress has passed a law that would not be subject to nullification?
Not off the top of my head right now, no, but I'm sure.
Okay.
I'm sure we could, just give me a little bit of time.
Okay.
All right,
Larry?
yeah, why don't we go ahead and you have up to a 5-minute closing if you'd like to.
Wait, can I ask a question real quick?
Yeah.
What new legislation would you want to propose
New legislation I want to propose.
on anything? Yeah, what do you have in mind, a new law you think should be established?
New legislation that I'd like to propose is the Homeless Veterans Initiative.
Okay,
We should not have our veterans on any street, under any bridge, anywhere in America. These are the people that we promised that if they went and served, we would make sure they were taken care of. They need to be off the street.
all right, so Homeless Veterans Initiative, anything else?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay,
That's
All
a
right.
big one for me. That's a
Thank you.
huge one.
got it.
Okay, and now you can take your up to 5-minute closing if you'd like. Susan Shifty's fine.
No, that's okay, because I can actually, everybody's been in the military, everybody knows if you're gonna go before a firing squad, phones or not. No, seriously, in the Army, they don't care, they let them ring, and you have to work through that, so. I want to take this time to thank you again for having me. Thank you for the questions. It provokes thought in me. Areas that I need to look at. So it's only going to make me a better person as an individual and as a citizen. So I appreciate that also. Again, we are living in America, the freest, greatest nation. And everybody has a voice in America. And it's how we exercise that voice that makes us better as a nation, better as a community, and better as individuals. So, again, when we go to make productive change, make positive change, or make a conversation of two minds that cannot seem to agree, it's all about the ability to communicate and navigate through that. So hopefully with the year 2020, we can finally get to that point where two opposing minds can come together for the betterment of the American people, for their constituents, and just for the community as a whole. We need to push forward. We can no longer reflect and stay in the back if we're looking to make any type of change that's beneficial to the average citizen and to the American. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for serving our country.
Yes.
Amen.
Oh, yeah.